Father built Whitmore and Associates from nothing. Or so he always told us. Every Thanksgiving, every birthday dinner, every Sunday afternoon when the family gathered around the table, the story came out again. He'd started with a single client, a handshake, and a second-hand briefcase. 30 years later, the firm handled estate planning for half the old money in Charlotte, North Carolina, and his name was on the door in brass letters. I grew up knowing that door was meant for me too. Not because anyone asked what I wanted, not because I showed any particular passion for tax law or trust administration, but because I was the oldest daughter of Gerald Whitmore, and in our family, legacy wasn't a suggestion. It was a blueprint. My younger sister got to be artistic. She studied interior design at UNC, and everyone thought that was charming. My brother played baseball through college, and nobody pressured him into anything. But me, I was the one who looked like my father, thought like my father, and apparently was going to be my father. That was decided before I could form a coherent opinion about it. So I went to law school. Duke. Because anything less would have been an embarrassment. I studied estate and trust law, which I genuinely found interesting, but not in the way my father meant. I wasn't fascinated by preserving old fortunes. I was fascinated by what happened when those fortunes moved, how wealth transferred, how institutions acquired assets, how you could restructure an entire organization's financial architecture from the inside out. My professors called it a gift for seeing the bigger picture. My father called it impractical. You need to understand the client first, he told me during my second year. The family, the history, the relationships. You can't just think about the money in the abstract. He wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't hearing me. I graduated near the top of my class. I had offers from 3 firms in Charlotte, 1 in Raleigh, and 1 in New York. The New York offer was from a boutique firm that specialized in institutional wealth management. Not just individual clients, but foundations, family offices, investment vehicles that held more zeros than I'd ever seen on a balance sheet. It was exactly where I wanted to be. I came home that Easter and told my parents over dinner. My mother put down her fork. My father looked at me the way he looked at briefs that had been filed incorrectly, with a patience that was really just a thin layer over contempt. New York, he said. Yes, you want to go to New York. I want to take this position. It's a serious opportunity. The firm manages. I know what those firms do. He folded his napkin. And I know what they want from young associates. 12-hour days, 7 days a week, until you burn out or make yourself indispensable. Meanwhile, we have a practice here. A family practice. With clients who have known you since you were 8 years old. Dad. Your name is already on the wall, Sophie. That stopped me. I hadn't known that. I looked at my mother and she looked away, which told me she had known. You put my name on the wall, I said slowly. Without asking me. It's where it belongs. I took the New York job. The next 6 months were the quietest my parents and I had ever been with each other. My mother called occasionally, short conversations about nothing. My father didn't call at all. My sister texted me sometimes, mostly memes, which was her way of saying she was on my side without saying it out loud. My brother was wrapped up in his own life, newly married, and I think he was relieved the pressure had shifted away from him. New York was hard, and it was extraordinary. The firm Callaway and Reed was small by Wall Street standards, but operated at a level that made my head spin in the best way. I worked under a senior partner named Patricia, who had rebuilt 3 failing family foundations from the ground up, and had a reputation for being either brilliant or terrifying depending on who you asked. She was both. She pushed me in ways law school hadn't. She expected me to see the structural problems before she pointed to them, to ask the questions that clients didn't know to ask, to think about financial architecture the way an engineer thinks about load-bearing walls. By my second year, I was doing things I hadn't expected to be doing for another decade. I also started to understand something that my father's practice had never shown me. The moment when a family business becomes too expensive to maintain. When the pride of ownership starts costing more than the asset is worth. When the smartest financial decision is also the most emotionally brutal one, and someone has to be the person who walks in and explains that, calmly, with documentation. I was good at that. I was good at it in a way that surprised even me. By the end of year 3, Patricia had introduced me to a different kind of work entirely. Not just advising on wealth management, but participating in acquisitions. Small ones at first, helping institutional clients absorb struggling family firms, negotiating the terms, handling the transition. then larger ones. The kind where you sit at a long conference table across from people who built something with their hands, and you have to explain, gently and precisely, why selling is the right choice. I thought about my father every time. Not with anger, just with a kind of clarity. My father was 71. Whitmore and Associates had been showing signs of strain. For several years, I knew, because my sister mentioned things in passing, and because I'd done my own research, the way I always did. The firm's client base was aging. 2 of the senior partners had retired. The office on Providence Road was in a building that needed significant renovation. My father had not brought in a new major client in 4 years. The firm that I now worked for, I'd been made a junior partner at Callaway and Reed, the youngest in the firm's history, had recently expanded its acquisition division. We weren't predatory. We looked for firms with genuine value whose owners were ready to transition. Even if they didn't know it yet, we helped them do it well. When our division head mentioned that we were looking at estate law practices in the Southeast, I disclosed the conflict of interest immediately. I told Patricia everything, my father's firm, the history, the fact that I hadn't been on speaking terms with my father for the better part of 2 years. I offered to recuse myself entirely. Patricia looked at me for a long moment. Do you want to be recused? I want to do this right, I said, whatever that means. Then stay on the team, don't lead. Just advise. The process took 8 months. Our acquisition team reached out to Whitmore and Associates through standard channels. My father, I was told, initially dismissed the inquiry. Then the second letter came, this one more specific about terms. Then a call with our team's lead, a man named Desmond, who had the kind of steady, unhurried voice that made difficult conversations feel manageable. I was not on that call. I was not on the first 2 meetings. I was in the room, finally, for the 3rd meeting, a formal presentation at our offices in Charlotte, where we'd rented a conference room at a hotel downtown. Our team had flown down. I was already in Charlotte. I'd flown in the night before, and had dinner with my mother, who didn't know I was involved in any of this, and who spent most of the meal telling me she missed me and that my father was tired, more tired than he admitted. He's proud, she said. You know how he is. I know. He talks about you, Sophie, when you're not around. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just held it. The next morning I walked into the hotel conference room at 8:15. Our team was already there. Desmond, our financial analyst Keiko, 2 associates. The coffee was fresh. The materials were stacked neatly at each chair. My father walked in at 8:30 with his remaining senior partner, a man I'd known my whole life, and their attorney. He saw me and stopped. Not dramatically, he just stopped. Like a man who has stepped off a curb and found the ground an inch lower than expected. A small internal recalibration. Sophie, he said. Hi, Dad. His senior partner looked between us. The attorney looked at his shoes. Desmond, to his enormous credit, simply stood and extended his hand. Gerald, thank you for making the trip. I think we have a lot of productive ground to cover today. My father sat down. He kept his face composed. That was something he'd always been able to do, keep his face composed, while everything behind it was doing something else entirely. I didn't lead the meeting. I'd agreed not to. I sat at the side of the table, slightly back, and I let Desmond walk through the presentation. The numbers, the market analysis, the transition structure we were proposing, one that would allow my father to remain as a senior consultant for up to 3 years, keep his existing client relationships, and receive a buyout that would fund his retirement comfortably and then some. It was a good deal, a genuinely good deal. I had made sure of that. Halfway through, my father asked a question that I recognized immediately. It was the kind of question he asked when he already knew the answer, and was testing whether you knew it too. Who structured the transition terms? Desmond glanced at me. Just briefly. The framework was developed by our advisory team, he said. Sophie was a key contributor. My father looked at me then. Really looked at me. Maybe for the first time in years. I couldn't entirely read his expression. I've spent a lot of time since then trying to. The 3-year consulting arrangement, he said. That was yours. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. You kept the client relationships intact. They're the most valuable part of what you built, I said. Breaking them apart would have been wrong. Another silence. His senior partner shifted in his chair. I put your name on the wall, my father said. Without asking. I know. That wasn't. He stopped. looked at the table. That wasn't the right way to do it. I hadn't expected that. In all the ways I'd imagined this conversation going, in all the versions I played out in my head on late nights in my apartment in Manhattan, that was not a version I prepared for. No, I said carefully. It wasn't. The firm is good work, he said. I want it to continue. He looked at Desmond, then back at me. I'm tired, Sophie. I know, Dad. The deal took another 3 months to finalize. My father's name stayed on the door. We negotiated that specifically, as a term he hadn't even asked for, but that I'd include it anyway. Because it was true that he built something real, and because some things don't need to be taken away just because the structure changes. I recused myself from the final negotiations. That was the right call, and I knew it. The closing happened on a Thursday in late October. I was back in New York. My father called me that evening, which was the first time he'd called me in almost 4 years. It's done, he said. I heard. Desmond's people they're good, professional. They are. A pause, the kind that used to mean an argument was coming, but this time it was just silence, and after a moment it stopped feeling like a standoff and started feeling like two people who had run out of positions to defend. Your mother wants you to come for Christmas, he said. I looked out my window at the city. 31 floors up, the lights were coming on across Midtown. That slow accumulation of yellow and white that happens every evening and still somehow catches me off guard. I'll be there, I said. Christmas was not a magical reconciliation. That's not how our family works, and I don't think that's how most families actually work. The ones you know well enough to be honest about. There were awkward moments and a few silences that stretched too long, and one conversation after dinner where my father and I almost got into it about a political topic neither of us should have touched. My sister gave me a look across the table that said don't, and I didn't. But there was also a moment on Christmas morning, before everyone else was up, when I found my father in the kitchen making coffee. He handed me a mug without being asked. We stood at the kitchen window and watched the neighbor's dog investigate the frost on the lawn. You're good at what you do, he said, not looking at me. Looking at the dog. I learned to think from you, I said. Even when I was thinking about something different. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite not one. I've thought a lot about what it means to choose your own path when the path you were handed wasn't wrong, exactly just someone else's. My father built something real. The work was meaningful. The clients were real people with real families and real fears about what would happen to what they'd spent their lives building. None of that was nothing. I understand that differently now than I did at 24. What I also understand is that I wouldn't have been able to see what I saw, do what I did, protect the things worth protecting in that firm if I had simply walked through the door with my name already on the wall. I needed to go away. I needed to become someone who understood the difference between inheriting something and earning it. The name is still on the door. Whitmore and Associates, now a division of Callaway and Reed's Southeast Estate Advisory Group. My father goes in 2 days a week. He says he's winding down. My mother says he's the happiest he's been in years, which I choose to believe even though I suspect she's editing. Last month, a colleague at the firm asked me how I'd ended up in acquisition advisory when my background was in estate law. I told her it was a long story. She said she had time. I thought about the brass letters on the door in Charlotte. I thought about the Easter dinner and the napkin my father folded. I thought about Patricia asking, "Do you want to be recused?" and what it meant that my answer wasn't yes. I had a very good reason to understand both sides of a negotiation, I told her. She laughed, assuming I meant something professional. I let her assume that. The most honest thing I can tell you about all of it is this. I didn't win. I don't think of it that way. My father didn't lose. The firm didn't disappear, it changed shape, which is what everything does eventually, if you're lucky enough for it to survive that long. What happened is that two people who were standing on opposite sides of a door finally figured out that the door wasn't the point. I still have the mug he handed me that Christmas morning. I don't know why I kept it. It's a plain white diner-style mug, nothing special. The kind that every kitchen in America has 3 or 4 of. But I brought it back to New York, and it sits in my cabinet, and some mornings I use it without thinking about it, and some mornings I pick it up and think about the frost on the neighbor's lawn, and the dog investigating it, and my father standing next to me, not saying anything that needed to be said. That's enough. That's actually more than enough. If you're listening to this and you're somewhere in the middle of it, the silence, the distance, the feeling that choosing yourself meant losing someone, I'm not going to tell you it resolves cleanly. I'm not going to tell you there's a moment where everything clicks into place and the hurt goes away. What I can tell you is that the path you build is yours to build, and the people worth keeping will still be there when you turn around, even if it takes longer than anyone expected, even if they put your name on the door before they thought to ask. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out when exactly things shifted. Not the dramatic moments, not the conference room, not the closing paperwork, not the Christmas morning with the coffee mug. The shift happened earlier, quieter, in a way I didn't recognize until much later. It happened the first time Patricia handed back a memo I'd spent 12 hours on and said simply, "You're still writing for approval. Write for clarity." I didn't fully understand what she meant then. I do now. My father spent 30 years building something real. I don't take that away from him, but somewhere in those 30 years, the building became the point, the name on the door, the legacy, the expectation that the next generation would simply continue the shape of what already existed. He stopped asking what the work was for and started asking who would carry it forward. Those are different questions, and confusing them cost us about 4 years of silence. What I've come to believe, not because anyone told me, but because I watched it play out in real time, is that the choices we make under pressure reveal something that comfortable circumstances never could. When I took the New York job against my father's wishes, I wasn't brave. I was scared and I was stubborn. And honestly, I wasn't entirely sure I was making the right call. What I had was a conviction that I needed to find out what I was capable of on my own terms, and that conviction turned out to be worth more than certainty would have been. The part that surprised me most wasn't the acquisition. It wasn't sitting across from my father in that conference room or watching him process what he was seeing. It was the moment I realized I had structured the deal to protect what he'd built, the client relationships, the consulting arrangement, his name on the door, not because I was required to, not because it made the numbers better, but because it was the right thing to do. That felt like something. That felt like the difference between intelligence and wisdom, and I don't use that word lightly because I spent a long time thinking they were the same thing. Cause and effect is real, but it's slower than people want it to be. My father didn't lose because he was wrong. He arrived at a hard moment because he held too tightly to a plan that was never mine to follow. I didn't win because I was righteous. I arrived somewhere useful because I stayed curious long enough and worked hard enough, and, critically, I had people like Patricia who refused to let me coast on potential. Every piece of it traces back to a choice someone made, usually a small one, usually a moment that didn't feel significant at the time. If I could go back and say something to myself at 24, standing in my parents' dining room, watching my father fold his napkin, I wouldn't say, "You're right, stand your ground." I'd say, "Do the work so well that your reasoning becomes undeniable. Stay honest about what you don't know. And don't let your need to prove something turn into the very rigidity you're trying to escape." That last one is the hard one. That's the one I'm still working on. The mug is still in my cabinet. Gerald went into the office last Tuesday. Desmond says the integration is ahead of schedule. And I'm okay with the fact that none of it is a clean ending, because clean endings are for stories that aren't quite true.